I remember the exact moment I realized Rule 3 existed for a reason. It was just past midnight, the kind of hour where the cemetery goes completely still, like the world has stepped back and forgotten it exists. I was walking the gravel path near the old mausoleums, doing a routine check before locking the east gate, when I heard someone say my name. It was quiet, almost careful, like they didn't want to be overheard. Hey, it sounded exactly like Marcus. That was the problem. Marcus had already clocked out almost an hour earlier. I had watched him leave. I even locked the staff gate behind him, so there was no reason he should still be inside the cemetery. That's when I remembered Rule 3 from the handbook. If someone calls your name from inside the cemetery after midnight, do not respond. The voice came again, closer this time. Hey, where are you? It shifted, moving somewhere between the rows of headstones to my right. Gravel crunched softly, but the footsteps didn't match the pace of a person walking. They stopped when I stopped. I didn't answer. Every instinct in me wanted to call back, to ask if Marcus had come back for something, to break the silence pressing in around me. But I kept my mouth shut. The voice didn't call a third time. It just stopped. And then something else started moving. Slow. Deliberate. I could hear it weaving through the graves, not walking on the path but cutting between stones like it didn't care what was in its way. It was coming toward me. I stayed completely still, staring straight ahead, pretending I hadn't heard anything at all. Because if I had answered, I probably wouldn't be here telling this story. The truth is, that wasn't even the worst thing that's happened on a night shift, but it was the moment I stopped thinking of this job as quiet, easy work. People think being a graveyard caretaker is boring. They don't know about the rules, and they definitely don't know why those rules exist. I didn't either, not until my week on the job. I took the job because it sounded like the easiest money I'd ever make. Night caretaker for a historic cemetery just outside town. Decent pay, minimal supervision, and long stretches where you're basically being paid to exist in one place and make sure nothing gets broken. After bouncing between jobs that demanded too much for too little, it felt like a break I didn't question. The cemetery itself was older than anything else in the area. Nearly 2 centuries of history packed into acres of uneven ground, crooked headstones, and towering trees that had grown so large they seemed to swallow parts of the sky. Some graves dated back to the early 1800s, their inscriptions worn smooth by time. Others were newer, cleaner, but somehow felt just as forgotten. My responsibilities were simple. Lock the gates at sunset. Patrol the grounds every couple of hours. Keep an eye out for trespassers or vandalism. Make sure the chapel stayed secured. That was it. No complicated systems, no heavy equipment, no late-night calls from management checking in on me. Just me, a flashlight, and a place where, technically speaking, nothing should ever happen again. Most nights were quiet. Not peaceful, there's a difference. Peaceful implies comfort. Quiet in a place like that feels more like something is waiting for a sound that never comes. The kind of silence that presses against your ears until you start noticing things you shouldn't. The creak of branches, the shift of dirt under your boots, the way shadows don't always sit still when the wind dies. I used to joke about it. Best security job in the world, I told my friends. Everyone I'm guarding is already dead. At the time, it felt funny, harmless. Looking back, I realize how little I understood. During orientation, the supervisor didn't bother with small talk. He walked me through the grounds once, pointing out the gates, the chapel, the older sections where the paths were harder to follow. Then he handed me a thin, worn handbook. Read it before your first solo shift, he said. I flipped through it later that evening expecting maintenance notes, maybe a few guidelines about dealing with trespassers or weather issues. And most of it was exactly that. procedures for locking up, instructions for reporting damage, basic stuff. But then I hit a section that didn't match the rest. Night shift rules. It wasn't just a page or two. It kept going. Rule after rule after rule, written in the same plain language as everything else, but with instructions that didn't belong in a job like this. Some of them were oddly specific. Others were vague in a way that made them worse. I remember sitting there in the break room, flipping through them slowly, trying to figure out if this was some kind of joke. Maybe something the staff came up with to mess with new hires. But there were too many of them, and none of them were written like a joke. Each one felt like it had been added for a reason. Over time, like every line existed, because someone had learned something the hard way. That was the first time I felt it, that subtle shift from easy job to something I couldn't quite explain. I should have stopped reading. Instead, I turned back to the beginning of the list and started going through the rules one by one. I wish I could say the rules felt ridiculous, that they were so over the top I laughed them off and forgot about them 5 minutes later. But they didn't read like that. They were too calm, too direct. No dramatic wording, no attempts to scare you, just instructions written like they belonged next to notes about locking gates and checking fences. Rule 1. Never enter the chapel after 1:00 a.m. No explanation, no context, just a line drawn in time like something changed after that hour. Rule 2. If you see someone standing near the fence after closing hours, do not approach them. That one made less sense the longer I thought about it. If someone was trespassing, approaching them was part of the job. That's literally what I was there for. Rule 3. If someone calls your name from inside the cemetery, do not respond. That one stuck with me. It felt personal somehow, like whoever wrote it knew exactly how it would happen. Rule 4. If you notice fresh soil on a grave that wasn't disturbed earlier, report it in the morning. Not investigate. Not check for damage. Just report it later. Rule 5. If lights appear inside the caretaker house while you are outside, do not go inside until sunrise. That was the one that made me put the handbook down for a second. Because it didn't just imply something strange. It implied something was already inside. I remember leaning back in the chair, staring at the wall, trying to piece together what kind of place would need rules like that. It felt less like a job manual and more like a survival guide written by people who couldn't fully explain what they'd seen. Still, I told myself what anyone would. It's just stories. Every old place has them. Every job with long hours and isolation builds its own kind of mythology. It was probably a tradition, something to mess with new hires, give them a few uneasy nights before they settled in. That explanation worked. For about an hour, Marcus found me still sitting there with the handbook open in my lap. He didn't ask what I thought of it. He just glanced down at the page I was on, then pulled out a chair across from me. "You're reading the rules," he said. "Yeah," I replied. "Didn't realize this job came with a horror novel." He didn't laugh. That should have been my first real warning. "They're not there for fun," he said. I shrugged, trying to keep it light. So what? Someone got bored and decided to write creepy instructions for the night shift. Marcus shook his head slowly, like he'd heard that before. Every rule in that book exists because someone ignored it. There was no hesitation in his voice, no build-up, just a statement. I tried to push back, but something about the way he said it made it hard to joke. "Come on," I said. "You're telling me all of these actually happened." "I'm telling you," he replied, leaning forward slightly, "that people don't make rules like that unless they have to." I didn't know what to say to that. Part of me still wanted to believe it was exaggeration. Stories that grew over time, until they turned into something bigger than they started as. But another part of me, the part that remembered how quiet the cemetery felt at night, wasn't so sure. Marcus stood up after a moment, pushing the chair back with a soft scrape against the floor. "You'll be doing your first full patrol tonight," he said. "Just stick to the paths, follow the rules, and don't try to figure things out." "Figure what out?" I asked. He paused at the doorway, just long enough to answer. "You'll see." And then he left, like that was enough explanation. I sat there for a while after he was gone, staring down at the handbook again. The rules didn't look any different, but they felt heavier now. Less like suggestions, more like boundaries. That night was the first time I walked the entire cemetery alone. My first solo patrol started just after midnight. Up until that point, everything had felt manageable. Even the rules, as strange as they were, hadn't fully settled in yet. They were just words on paper, easy to remember, easy to ignore. But the moment I stepped out onto the path alone, something shifted. The cemetery didn't feel like the same place I had walked through earlier that evening. The air was colder, heavier somehow, like it had been sitting untouched for hours. The trees that bordered the property stretched high overhead, their branches weaving together into a loose canopy that blocked out most of the sky. What little moonlight made it through fell in uneven patches, leaving long shadows between rows of gravestones. The wind moved constantly, but not in a steady way. It came in slow breaths, pushing through the trees and then disappearing just as quickly, like something was testing the space rather than passing through it. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called out. Then another answered. After that, silence again. I followed the main path like Marcus had told me, sweeping my flashlight across the ground and over the stones as I walked. Everything looked normal, undisturbed, just rows of names and dates stretching further than the light could reach. For a while, nothing happened, and that almost made it worse. Because the longer the quiet held, the more aware I became of every small sound. My own footsteps, the faint crunch of gravel, the way my breathing seemed louder than it should have been. I told myself this was what the job was. This was what I signed up for. Just walking, just watching, nothing else. About halfway through the patrol, I passed a section of older graves near the east side of the property. I remembered it because one of the headstones had been tilted at an angle, like the ground beneath it had shifted years ago and never settled back properly. I kept walking, didn't stop, didn't think anything of it. But when I looped back around maybe 10 minutes later, something felt off. It took me a second to realize what it was. The same grave, the one with the tilted stone. Only now the ground around it didn't look the same. I slowed down, raising the flashlight slightly. The soil looked loose. Not freshly dug exactly, but disturbed. Like something had pushed up from underneath and broken the surface tension just enough to be noticeable. The flowers that had been placed there earlier, wilted, old, but still arranged, were scattered now, some of them partially buried in uneven dirt. I stopped a few feet away, and immediately, Rule 4 came back to me. If you notice fresh soil on a grave that wasn't disturbed earlier, report it in the morning. Not investigate, not approach, just report it. I should have kept walking. I knew that. But there's something about seeing something out of place that pulls you in, a need to understand it, to prove there's a normal explanation. Animals, maybe. That's what I told myself. Something digging, something small, it made sense. Enough sense to take a step closer. Then another. The beam of my flashlight settled directly over the disturbed soil. And that's when it moved. It wasn't dramatic. There was no sudden collapse, no hand reaching up through the dirt like something out of a movie. It was subtle, a slow shift, like the ground itself was breathing. The soil lifted just slightly, then settled again. I froze, every part of my body locked in place, like my brain hadn't decided what to do yet. Then it moved again, a small ripple under the surface, traveling just a few inches before stopping. That was enough. I took a step back, then another. I didn't turn around, didn't run. I just kept moving backward, my eyes fixed on that patch of earth like it might follow me if I looked away. After a few seconds, the movement stopped. Completely. The soil went still. The flowers didn't shift again. It was like nothing had happened. But I knew better. I stood there for longer than I want to admit, waiting to see if it would move again, waiting for some kind of explanation to present itself. Nothing did. Eventually, I lowered the flashlight slightly, forcing myself to breathe normally again. I didn't go any closer, didn't try to check it again. I just turned and walked back to the main path, keeping my pace steady just like I had earlier, like everything was normal, like I hadn't just watched the ground move from underneath. I finished the rest of the patrol without stopping again. But I didn't stop thinking about it either. By the time I got back to the caretaker's station, I already knew one thing for sure. The rules weren't exaggerations. And whatever had caused that movement, I had ignored the one instruction that mattered. I should have waited until morning. Marcus didn't seem surprised when I told him what I saw the next night. Marcus didn't react the way I expected when I told him about the grave. He didn't look surprised. He didn't question it. He just listened, arms crossed, leaning back against the desk like he'd heard the same story before, maybe more than once. When I finished, there was a long pause. Then he nodded slightly. "East side?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, "older section, tilted headstone." "Figures." That was it. No disbelief, no attempt to explain it away. Just quiet confirmation. I waited for him to say something else, something that would make it feel normal again. But instead, he pushed himself off the desk and motioned for me to follow him outside. It was still early evening, the last light of the sun fading behind the trees. The cemetery looked almost peaceful again, like it had reset itself after the night. Marcus walked slowly along the path, hands in his pockets. "You ever look into what this place used to be?" he asked. "A cemetery," I said. He gave a small shake of his head. "Before that, I hadn't. To me, it had always just been what it was now. Rows of graves, old stones, quiet ground." Marcus stopped near the fence line, looking out toward a section where the trees grew thicker. "This land been used for the dead a lot longer than people think," he said. "Long before the cemetery was officially built." I didn't say anything. I just listened. "Back in the early days," he continued, "this area was used as a quarantine burial ground. People who died from disease, outbreaks they didn't fully understand. They buried them fast. No ceremonies, no proper markers." He gestured vaguely toward the ground. "Then later during the war it got repurposed. Temporary graves. Soldiers brought in, buried quick, sometimes moved later, sometimes not. Records didn't always keep up." I felt a slight tension build in my chest. "And after that," he said, "there was a hospital out here, small one. Didn't last long, but it had its own cemetery. Different section, different system. A lot of those graves got folded into this place when the main cemetery expanded." "So you're saying," I started. "I'm saying," Marcus cut in, "there are parts of this ground where nobody knows exactly who's buried where. Names got lost. Records disappeared. Some graves were never marked properly to begin with." I looked out across the rows of headstones, suddenly aware of how uneven everything felt, how some sections didn't quite line up with others. "How many?" I asked. He shrugged. Enough. The wind picked up slightly, moving through the trees with a low, steady sound. Marcus turned back toward me. Caretakers have been reporting things here for decades, he said, long before you or me. Like what? I asked, even though I already had an idea. Voices, he said. Not loud, not clear, just there, moving between the graves. I felt a chill run down my arms. Shadows too, he added. Not tied to anything, not cast by light, just shapes that don't stay where they should. I thought about the way the ground had shifted the night before. And lights, Marcus said, inside buildings that are supposed to be empty. Chapel, caretaker, house, places that get locked up tight. Rule 5. I didn't mention it. Marcus watched me for a second, like he could tell exactly what I was thinking. You start seeing patterns after a while, he said. Things happen at certain times, in certain places. That's why the rules exist. To avoid it, I asked. To survive it, he corrected. There was no hesitation in his voice. No doubt. I swallowed, trying to keep my tone steady. And if you don't follow them? Marcus didn't answer right away. He glanced out toward the far end of the cemetery, where the trees grew denser and the paths became harder to follow. Most people who ignore them don't last long here, he said finally. That mean they quit? I asked. He looked back at me. Some do. That wasn't reassuring. And the others, I pressed. Another pause. Longer this time. There was a caretaker. Marcus said slowly, few years back, night shift like you. Thought the rules were overblown, started testing them. Little things at first. I felt my stomach tighten. What happened? Marcus exhaled quietly. He didn't show up for his shift one night, he said. No call, no message, just gone. Did they search for him? I asked. Of course, Marcus said. Police, staff, volunteers, they checked the whole property. And they found his flashlight, he said, out near the older sections. I immediately thought of the grave I had seen. Anything else? I asked. Marcus shook his head. No body, no tracks, nothing that explained where he went. The wind moved through the trees again, louder this time. Officially, he's still listed as missing, Marcus added. Case never closed. I stared out across the cemetery, the weight of what he was saying settling in. Unofficially, I asked. Marcus didn't answer. He didn't need to. Because something in the way he looked toward the graves told me everything I needed to know. Some stories don't get written down. Some things don't leave. That night when I started my next patrol, I wasn't just walking the paths anymore. I was paying attention. And that's when I started noticing the patterns. It didn't happen all at once. The change came slowly over a few shifts, like the cemetery was easing me into something I didn't fully understand yet. At first, midnight was just another hour, a point on the clock where I'd check the time, adjust my route, keep moving. But after a while, I started noticing that things felt different after that point. Not dramatically, just enough to make you question what you were hearing. The air would grow heavier, like the space between everything had thickened. Sounds didn't carry the way they should. Sometimes they traveled too far. Other times they died out too quickly, like something was swallowing them before they reached you. My footsteps were the first thing I noticed. On some nights they sounded normal, gravel crunching beneath my boots, steady and predictable. But other times the sound lagged behind me slightly, like it wasn't keeping up with my pace. And once or twice, I could have sworn I heard a second set. Not right next to me, but somewhere off the path, moving between the graves. I never stopped to check. That was one of the things you learn quickly out there. Not every sound needs confirmation. The wind didn't help either. It would move through the cemetery in uneven bursts, slipping between the headstones and trees, carrying faint noises with it. At first, I told myself it was just leaves brushing together, branches shifting overhead, until I started hearing patterns. Not words, not clearly, but something close enough that your brain tries to fill in the gaps. Whispering, soft, indistinct, always just beyond understanding. The kind of sound that disappears the second you focus on it, leaving you wondering if it was ever there at all. I tried to ignore it, tried to treat it like background noise. But the longer I worked those shifts, the harder that became. Because there was one thing that didn't stay vague. One thing that didn't fade when I focused on it. My name. The first time it happened after that night near the mausoleums, I almost answered without thinking. It came from somewhere behind me. Clear, familiar. Hey. I stopped mid-step, the sound hitting me like a reflex. It was Marcus again. Or at least, it sounded exactly like him. Same tone, same casual way he spoke, like he was just trying to get my attention without making a big deal out of it. For a split second, I forgot everything. Then Rule 3 hit me. If someone calls your name from inside the cemetery after midnight, do not respond. I stayed quiet, didn't turn around, didn't even shift my weight. The silence stretched. Then the voice came again. Closer. Where'd you go? It moved. Not along the path. Through the graves. I could hear it, faint but unmistakable. Something brushing past stone, cutting through spaces no one would normally walk. My chest tightened, but I kept my mouth shut. Kept staring forward like I hadn't heard a thing. After a few seconds, the voice stopped. Completely. No footsteps, no movement. Just gone. Like it had never been there. I waited longer than I needed to before moving again, just to make sure. Then I kept walking. That should have been the end of it. A one-time thing. Something I could chalk up to stress or imagination. But it was. It kept happening. Not every night, but often enough that I started expecting it. Sometimes it sounded like Marcus. Other times, it didn't sound like anyone I recognized at all. Different tones, different packing, but always the same pattern. My name, called from somewhere inside the cemetery. Always after midnight. Always followed by that same quiet movement between the graves if I didn't respond. And every time I followed the rule. I stayed silent. I didn't look. I didn't acknowledge it. And eventually it always stopped. But the longer it went on, the more it started to feel like something else. Not random. Not accidental. Deliberate. Like whatever was out, there wasn't just calling to me. It was waiting for me to answer. Testing how long I could hold out. And the worst part wasn't the fear. It was the curiosity. Because every time the voice faded, there was a moment, just a second, where I wondered what would happen if I broke the rule. That thought stayed with me. Longer than it should have. Long enough that one night, without meaning to. I did. It happened on a night when the weather turned against me. The storm rolled in just after midnight, fast and heavy, like it had been waiting for the exact moment the cemetery crossed into that hour. Wind tore through the trees in violent bursts, bending branches until they groaned, scattering leaves and debris across the paths. Rain followed not long after, cold and relentless, soaking through my jacket within minutes. It should have drowned everything out. Every sound, every whisper, every trace of whatever moved out there after midnight. For a while it did. I remember thinking, as I walked the main path with my head down against the rain, that maybe this was the one night I wouldn't hear anything strange. The storm was loud enough to cover it all. I was wrong. I had just passed the older sections near the east side when I heard it. Faint at first, barely noticeable over the wind. My name. I stopped without thinking, heart kicking up immediately. It came again, louder this time, cutting through the storm like it didn't belong to it. Hey, it was Marcus. No hesitation, no distortion. It sounded exactly like him, but there was something different in his voice. Panic. Where are you? He called out. I need help. Every rule I had memorized hit me all at once. Rule 3. Do not respond. I knew it. I understood it. But instinct doesn't care about rules. Not when someone sounds like they're in trouble. Marcus, I called back before I could stop myself. Where are you? The moment the words left my mouth, everything changed. The storm didn't fade. It didn't quiet. But somehow, the cemetery went silent anyway. Not physically, but underneath. Like all the other sounds had been pushed aside, leaving only the wind and the rain, stripped of anything else. No voice answered me. No footsteps approached. For a second, I thought maybe I had imagined it. Maybe I had just shouted into the storm like an idiot, responding to something that wasn't even there. Then I heard it. Movement. Vast. Not slow and deliberate like before. Not careful. This was different. It was coming from somewhere deep within the rows of graves, cutting straight through them without hesitation. I heard branches snap, sharp, sudden cracks that echoed even over the wind. Gravel shifted violently, like something was tearing across the paths instead of walking them. It was coming toward me, and it was moving too fast. I turned, sweeping my flashlight across the darkness, but the beam barely cut through the rain. It flickered over headstones, over trees, over empty space where something should have been. But there was nothing there. Nothing I could see. The movement didn't slow. It didn't hesitate. It just kept coming. My chest tightened as the realization hit me all at once. That was Marcus. Whatever had called my name. It wasn't him. And now it knew I had answered. The sound shifted direction suddenly, veering off to my left, then circling behind me without losing speed. It wasn't running in a straight line. It was weaving, cutting through the cemetery in ways that didn't make sense, like it didn't need to follow any kind of path. I spun in place, trying to track it, but every time I thought I had a direction, it changed again. Closer, then farther, then right behind me. Something slammed into a tree nearby, hard enough to shake loose a cascade of wet leaves. I flinched, stumbling back a step. Still nothing in the beam of my flashlight. But it was there. I could feel it now. Not just hear it. That same heavy pressure in the air, like the space around me had tightened. Like something was closing in without needing to be seen. I backed away slowly, my breathing uneven, my grip tightening around the flashlight as I tried to keep some kind of control over the situation. Marcus, I said again, quieter this time, but the name felt wrong as soon as it left my mouth. The movement stopped instantly. Dead still. Right in front of me. Close. Too close. The rain kept falling. The wind kept pushing through the trees. But whatever had been moving, it had stopped. And for the first time since this started, I realized something worse than the sound. Something far more dangerous. It wasn't just reacting anymore. It was waiting. And I had just told it exactly where I was. I didn't mean to see it. Up until that moment, everything had stayed just out of reach. Sounds without shape, movement without form. Something you could almost convince yourself wasn't real if you tried hard enough. But the second it stopped in front of me, something shifted. The rain hadn't let up. It hammered down against the ground, against the stones, against me, blurring everything beyond a few feet. My flashlight shook slightly in my hand as I raised it, the beam cutting through the darkness in a narrow, unsteady line. At first, I thought there was nothing there. Just more headstones, more shadows. Then something moved, low to the ground, fast enough that I almost missed it. It slipped between two graves, hugging the earth in a way that didn't look natural. Not like an animal, not like anything I'd ever seen before. The motion was too smooth, too controlled, like it wasn't pushing against the ground so much as gliding over it. I froze. The beam of my flashlight tracked slowly to the left, catching just the edge of it as it passed behind a large stone monument. For a split second, I saw its outline. Not clearly, never clearly, but enough. Its shape didn't match anything familiar. Limbs too long, or maybe not limbs at all, just something extending and pulling itself forward in ways that didn't follow the normal limits of a body. It stayed close to the ground, pressed into the shadows, like it didn't want to rise any higher than it had to. Then it disappeared behind the monument. The movement stopped. Completely. The rain filled the silence again, heavy and constant, but underneath it, I could feel that same pressure building. It was still there, watching, waiting. My heart was pounding now, loud enough that I was sure I would miss any sound it made next. Then it spoke. "Hey." The voice came from behind the monument. But it wasn't right anymore. It still sounded like Marcus, but only on the surface. Underneath that, something else was layered into it, something off. The tone dragged slightly, like it was being pulled apart and put back together at the same time. Certain syllables stretched too long, others clipped too short. Like someone trying to imitate a voice they didn't fully understand. "Where'd you go?" I didn't answer. Not this time. Every part of me was locked in place, caught between the instinct to run and the fear of what would happen if I moved. The thing behind the monument shifted. I heard it scrape lightly against the stone, a slow, deliberate sound. Then my name again. Closer, more distorted, like it was getting worse the more it tried. That was enough. I turned and ran. I didn't care about the rules anymore, not in that moment. All I could think about was distance, putting as much space between me and that thing as possible. My boots slammed against the gravel path, slipping slightly on the wet surface as I pushed forward. The Caretaker building wasn't far, but it felt like it had never been farther away. Behind me, something moved. Not as fast as before, but steady, following. I didn't look back. I didn't slow down. I just ran until the outline of the building came into view through the rain, the faint shape of it cutting through the darkness like something solid, in a place that no longer felt real. I reached the door, fumbling with the handle for a second before forcing it open and slipping inside. The moment I shut it behind me, the outside noise dulled. Not completely, but enough. I stood there, back pressed against the door, trying to catch my breath, listening for anything that might have followed me. There was nothing. No movement. No voice. Just the rain. Marcus found me like that a few minutes later. He didn't ask what happened right away. He just looked at me for a second, taking in the way I was standing there, soaked, shaken, barely able to steady my breathing. "You answered it," he said. "It wasn't a question." I nodded. He exhaled slowly, like he'd expected it. "I saw something," I said. "Out there, it wasn't right." Marcus didn't look surprised. "Did it stay low?" he asked. "Yeah." "Move fast." I nodded again. "And the voice?" he pressed. "Wrong," I said, like it was trying but it couldn't get it right. Marcus looked past me toward the door, his expression tightening slightly. "That's how it starts," he said quietly. I swallowed, forcing the question out. "What is it?" For a moment, I thought he wouldn't answer. Then he did. "This place," he said slowly, "it's not just where the dead are buried." I felt a chill run through me. "There's something else here," he continued. "Something that's been here longer than the cemetery itself. It doesn't stay above ground all the time. Most of the time, it's underneath." I thought about the grave, the shifting soil. "It listens," Marcus said, "learns voices, learns names, and then it uses them." "To what?" I asked, even though I already knew. "To bring people closer." The room felt smaller suddenly. "Anyone who answers it," Marcus added, "gives it what it needs." I stared at him. "And what's that?" He hesitated, then said it. "Permission." The word settled into the silence between us. Heavy, final. I looked back at the door, half expecting something to be standing on the other side. "So the rules," I started. Marcus nodded. "They're not there to keep things in order," he said. "They're there to keep you alive." And for the first time since I started the job, I understood what they were really for. Marcus didn't sit down after that. He stayed near the door, like he didn't trust it completely anymore, like something on the other side might still be listening. For a while, neither of us spoke. The rain kept falling, steady and relentless, tapping against the windows, running down the glass in thin streams. It should have felt normal again, safe even, but it didn't. Not after what I had seen. Not after what I had done. Finally, I broke the silence. "You said it's been here a long time," I said. "How long?" Marcus crossed his arms, thinking. "Longer than anyone working here now," he said. "Maybe longer than the cemetery itself. Hard to say exactly, but the first reports go back decades." "Reports?" I asked. He nodded. "Caretakers, night staff, people who worked this place before it got modernized. They started noticing patterns, same kinds of incidents over and over, voices, movement under the ground, people going missing or quitting without explanation." I thought about the handbook, the rules that didn't belong. "They didn't understand it at first," Marcus continued. "Tried to treat it like anything else, investigate it, confront it." "That didn't work," I said. Marcus gave a slight shake of his head. "No, it just made things worse." He moved away from the door slightly, packing once across the room before stopping again. "Eventually, they figured something out," he said. "Not what it is, not where it came from, but how it behaves." I leaned forward slightly. "How?" "It doesn't act randomly," Marcus said. "It reacts. Certain things draw its attention. Certain actions make it more active." "Like answering it," I said. He looked at me. "Exactly." A knot tightened in my chest. "The rules weren't written all at once," he went on. "They were added over time. Every time something happened, every time someone made a mistake and didn't come back, they added another line, another boundary." I thought about how long that list had been, how specific some of those rules were. "They realized something important," Marcus said. "As long as you don't engage with it, it mostly stays down there. It listens, it moves, but it doesn't fully come up." "And if you do?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he held my gaze for a second longer than usual. "It gets curious." The word felt worse than anything else he could have said. "Curious?" I repeated. Marcus nodded. "It starts paying attention to you, more than usual. It learns faster, it adapts." I felt a cold weight settle in my stomach. "And when you answered it," he said quietly, "you gave it something it didn't have before." "My voice," I said. "Your voice," he confirmed. The room felt smaller again, more closed in. It's not just mimicking anymore, Marcus added. Now it knows what you sound like when you respond, how you speak, how you react. I thought back to the way it had called my name, the way it had changed, like it was adjusting in real time. And that's bad, I said. Marcus let out a slow breath. It means it won't stop as easily. Silence settled between us again. Heavy, uncomfortable. Am I in danger? I asked finally. Marcus hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. You're more at risk now than you were before, he said. That's the truth. I ran a hand through my hair, trying to process it. So what, I just keep following the rules and it goes away? Maybe, Marcus said. Maybe. That word echoed in my head. But there's something else, he added. I looked up. What? He shifted slightly, like he wasn't sure he should say it. There's a reason one rule was never written down, he said. A chill ran through me. Why not? Because putting it in writing would mean admitting something they didn't want to confirm, Marcus said. I stared at him. What rule? He met my eyes. If it learns your voice, it keeps calling. The words settled in slowly. Too slowly. You mean here, I asked, in the cemetery? Marcus didn't respond immediately. And that was enough, because the implication was already there. It doesn't stay contained. Not completely. I felt my chest tighten again, the memory of that distorted voice replaying in my head. People who answered it, I said slowly. What happened to them? Marcus looked toward the window, rain still streaking down the glass. Some of them disappeared, he said. Others, they left. Left, I repeated. They couldn't handle it, he said. Said they kept hearing it, not just here, at home, on the street, anywhere it was quiet enough. A cold silence filled the room. I didn't need him to say the rest, because I could already hear it in my mind. That voice, calling my name. Different now. Closer. Learning. I looked at Marcus again, my decision already forming before I said it out loud. I'm not staying here, I said. He nodded once. I didn't think you would. And for the first time since I took the job, leaving felt less like a choice, and more like the only way out. I didn't stay. I left the job 3 days after that night. Didn't finish the schedule. Didn't wait for a replacement. I packed what little I had in the caretaker's quarters, handed in the keys, and walked away without looking back at the gates. Marcus didn't try to stop me. He just nodded, like he understood better than anyone why I couldn't stay. You'll still hear it sometimes, he told me before I left, even after. I didn't ask what he meant. I think part of me already knew. The first night away felt normal. Quiet apartment, city noise in the distance, cars passing, people talking somewhere far below my window, the kind of background sound that should drown out anything else. I almost convinced myself it was over, that whatever lived out there, whatever moved beneath that cemetery, couldn't reach beyond it. Then sometime past midnight, I heard it. Faint, soft. My name. I froze. It didn't sound distorted this time. It didn't sound wrong. It sounded exactly like it should. That was the worst part. I didn't answer. I haven't answered since. But it hasn't completely stopped either. It doesn't happen every night. Sometimes weeks go by without anything at all. And then, just when I start to forget, just when I start to believe it was all in my head, I hear it again. Always when it's quiet. Always when there's just enough silence for something else to slip through. People think cemeteries are scary because of the dead, because of what might be buried beneath the ground. But that's not what you should be afraid of. The dead don't call your name. They don't learn your voice. They don't wait for you to answer. Whatever is down there, whatever has been there long before anyone thought to build over it, it doesn't stay contained the way we want to believe. And the worst part is, most people have experienced something like this at least once. You're alone. Everything is quiet. And then you hear it. Your name, clear as day. You turn, expecting to see someone standing there. But there's no one. So you laugh it off. Tell yourself it was nothing. Your mind playing tricks on you. And most of the time, maybe it is. But not always. Because now I know something I wish I didn't. Sometimes it isn't your imagination. Sometimes something is testing you, waiting to see if you'll respond, waiting to hear your voice. So if you ever hear your name called in a quiet place, make sure you know who's calling before you answer. And if you've ever heard something like that, when no one was around, just think about it for a second. Because you might not have been as alone as you thought.